Hey guys, tonight we wander into a place that most people have never even heard of, despite it once being the largest city north of Mesoamerica. You're standing at the base of a massive earthen pyramid, taller than a 10-story building. It's called Monk's Mound, and right now, as the sun melts into a swampy summer dusk, the air is thick with the sound of crickets, a buzz of cicadas, and something else, a kind of hush that feels like history itself holding its breath. The fireflies blink like scattered embers above you. But here's the thing. Not all of those flickers might be fireflies. Some swear by flickering ghost lights dancing around the mound's crown, as if old priests still pace up there, whispering instructions to a city long gone. This was Cahokia. At its peak around the year 1100 CE, it might have had as many as 20,000 people more than London at the time. Let that sink in. And yet you've probably never read about it in school. That's all right. Most of us didn't. You're here now, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere cozy, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far we drift together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You make your way up the terraced steps of Monk's Mound, your footsteps soft in the evening loam. It feels like a hike up a hill, but this hill is entirely man-made. More than 600,000 cubic meters of earth were moved by hand, basket by basket, to form this massive structure. You touch the gritty dirt walls as you ascend. The mound isn't just big, it's deliberate, layered, designed, and despite being over 1,000 years old, it still holds its shape like a sleeping colossus. At the top, the wind picks up. You can see the Mississippi River winding far off to the west, its muddy flow glinting faintly under the moon. The view is breathtaking, especially when you imagine what Cahokia looked like at its height. Plaza after plaza below, dozens of other mounds rising around you, straight lines drawn in dirt like ancient circuit boards. This wasn't a random settlement. It was a city of vision. And yet, no one knows what happened to the original inhabitants. They vanished, left behind no written language, no Rosetta Stone, just these mounds and the unsettling stories whispered by later tribes who refused to live here. You feel that hum again, something beneath the surface, like a thrum of old energy. There's something about Monk's Mound that feels unfinished, or waiting. The main mound was likely topped with a large wooden building, maybe a temple, maybe a palace, maybe both. Historians still argue whether this structure served spiritual or governmental purposes, or if those two roles were ever really separate. After all, in a city where rulers claimed their authority came from the stars, priest and king were probably the same terrifying person. You run your fingers along the packed clay and imagine the people who climbed this same path centuries ago. Some say only elites were allowed up here. Others believe commoners made pilgrimages, bearing tribute or seeking visions. And still others whisper that sacrifices, possibly human ones, happened up here. No proof, of course. Just scattered bones, a hint of red ochre, and a vague sense of dread when night falls. Now take a moment and tilt your head back. The stars overhead haven't changed since Cahokia's builders looked up. But back then, those stars dictated everything: harvests, ceremonies, city layout. Monk's Mound is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. That's not a fluke. You're standing on something that was mathematically mapped out using wooden siding posts and solar shadows. Ancient engineering with a mystic flair. But let's pause for something weirder. Some modern visitors claim to have seen floating orbs around the mound at night. Will-o'-the-wisps, perhaps? Ball lightning. Or just ... echoes. Others report inexplicable feelings: anxiety, nausea, even sudden euphoria while standing near certain corners. Is it the ley lines? Residual energy? The sheer effort it took to build this place? Whatever it is, you're definitely not getting regular Midwest vibes. Here, you crouch at the summit and feel the compacted earth vibrate faintly under your feet. It's just your heartbeat, ... probably. But then you notice the perfect view of the other mounds around you, each one spaced just so, forming geometric patterns invisible from ground level. Cahokia wasn't just big. It was designed with a kind of obsessive intent. And here's the kicker. We don't even know what the people of Cahokia called themselves. Cahokia is the name of a later tribe in the area. The real name? Lost, vanished like vapor into a humid summer dusk. Still, the presence lingers. You feel it like static electricity on your skin. The silence here is too loud, the air too thick with memory. One misplaced step, and you half expect the ground to open and whisper secrets into your ear. As you begin descending Monk's Mound, you glance back one more time. A soft glow pulses near the base, probably a firefly. Hopefully, the ghost lights don't like being watched. You keep walking, feet crunching along a faint trail between two overgrown fields. But those fields once framed an extraordinary vision. Cahokia wasn't some haphazard sprawl of huts and scattered mounds. It was a gridded, engineered marvel. From your position near the Grand Plaza, you can now sense it. Invisible lines crisscrossing the earth, like ghost streets laid down by a master planner with a thing for solar alignment and ceremony. The city was organized along a central north-south axis, with Monk's Mound as its anchor. Everything else radiated out plazas, satellite mounds, even residential neighborhoods. But unlike your typical grid, this one also answered to the sky. Astronomical alignments guided much of Cahokia's structure. Roads and mound alignments often mirrored the rising or setting sun during solstices. Think of it as urban planning meets cosmic choreography. Yes, zoning laws, but dictated by the heavens. It's here that you start seeing the layout not just as functional, but deeply symbolic. Picture yourself as a Cahokian resident. Your path through the city wouldn't just take you to the market or the temple. It would carry you along a cosmological journey. The center of the city mirrored the center of the universe. The north, the realm of death. The east, the place of rebirth. Every plaza you crossed and every mound you circled was part of a larger spiritual diagram. Mainstream archaeologists agree that Cahokia had some form of city planning. But historians still argue whether the grid was laid out in one ambitious burst or adjusted gradually over generations. Either way, the scale of coordination is astounding, especially for a society without draft animals or the wheel. Imagine managing construction projects across nearly 6 square miles of city without cranes or blueprints. All they had were digging sticks, determination, and a seriously compelling reason to move a lot of dirt. You pause at a smaller platform mound, half reclaimed by brush. From above, this structure lines up with others in a near-perfect right angle. Again, you feel the unseen geometry at play. Beneath your feet lies a patch of packed earth, once covered with homes. Thousands of people lived in arranged neighborhoods, their houses spaced out with courtyards and fencing. These weren't just mud huts tossed together. They were spaced evenly, sometimes with purpose-built walkways and drainage systems. Ancient suburbia, but with better celestial vibes. Let's sprinkle in something weird now. Some researchers claim the mounds and plazas were built to resemble a giant falcon. Yes, from above, they argue, the layout forms a mythic bird in flight wings outstretched, head pointed skyward. No solid proof, but once you hear it, it's hard to unsee. Were Cahokia's builders encoding myths into the land itself? Or is this just modern people playing ... with sacred architecture? As you walk, the wind brushes past tall grass and crickets chatter softly. You almost trip over a sunken dip in the ground. A borrow pit, one of the many massive holes from which Cahokians scooped the dirt to build their mounds. They weren't eyesores. Some became lakes and ceremonial pools. Imagine a whole city reshaping the land itself, not just to build, but to express meaning. A theater of earth and air. You reach the central Grand Plaza, now an open, grassy field the size of 30 football fields. Try to wrap your mind around that. 30 football fields. Today it looks like a peaceful meadow, but back then it pulsed with life. Public ceremonies, markets, ritual processions, maybe even competitive sports or ritual combat. The flatness wasn't natural. It was leveled deliberately. Imagine how many man-hours it took to flatten that much earth without a single bulldozer in sight. From here, the grid becomes obvious. You glance east, another mound. South, another one. Everything flows outward from Monk's Mound like the ripples of a stone dropped in water. Spatial logic with spiritual overtones. Modern urban planners would weep at the precision. Oh, and here's your fringe tidbit for the evening. There's a theory lightly ridiculed, but not fully disproven, that the entire grid was designed using shadow sticks. Picture a priest sticking a pole in the ground at dawn, marking the shadow's angle at certain hours of the day, then repeating it across the terrain. Over years, this might have created a kind of prodigy PS system rooted in sunlight and patience. Low tech, but weirdly effective. You close your eyes and picture it all. The drumbeat of distant ceremonies, the clang of tools shaping earth, voices calling out across plazas as workers aligned new structures with the rising sun. This wasn't just building, it was devotion sculpted into dirt. Still, there are mysteries. Why did some mounds deviate from the grid? Why do some align to lunar events instead of solar ones? Historians still debate whether this represents rival priesthoods, staggered construction eras, or shifts in political power. Some even suggest that the layout intentionally allowed for these sacred misalignments, cosmic tension built right into the city's bones. One last note before you move on. Under your feet, deep beneath the soil, archaeologists have found post holes, big ones, suggesting huge wooden structures once stood in precise rows. Not homes. Maybe temples. Maybe astronomical devices. Maybe nothing we'd recognize. The point is, Cahokia had plans within plans. City, story, and star map all folded together like an earthen origami, and you're standing right in the middle of it. You veer slightly northwest now, toward a ring of stumpy logs arranged in a circle. From a distance, they look unimpressive, just dull wooden posts, poking up from the soil like a forgotten picket fence. But as you step into the middle of the ring and look around, something clicks. This wasn't random. You're standing inside a replica of Cahokia's most curious celestial structure, Woodhenge. Yes, Woodhenge. No relation to Stonehenge, except for the catchy nickname. But like its stony cousin, this timber circle was an ancient calendar, aligned precisely to track the rising sun on solstices and equinoxes. Cahokians would have gathered here in reverent silence as the sun peeked over the horizon, shining straight through one marked post to another. A prehistoric clock made of red cedar and ceremony. You can almost hear it now. The breathless hush as dawn creeps in. The muffled chants. The gasp of recognition as the first ray of sunlight slides perfectly between the sacred posts, touching the heart of the city. Historians still argue whether these events were simple observances or full-blown religious festivals. Some say sacrifices may have occurred here, animal or human, no one's certain. But this much is clear. Time mattered to the people of Cahokia, not as an abstract concept, but as something physical, something you could stand inside. Mainstream. Archaeological fact. Multiple Woodhenges existed at Cahokia. Not just one. They were rebuilt several times over the centuries. each time slightly larger or more accurate, suggesting a deepening obsession with astronomy. The final version, with 72 posts, could have tracked solstices, equinoxes, and perhaps even eclipses. You're not just in a sacred circle. You're in a prehistoric planetarium. The logs around you are modern replicas. Sure, but they stand in the original post holes. And these post holes? They're as precise as anything NASA might lay out today. It's unnerving to realize ancient engineers here could predict celestial events just by watching shadows in the sky. Still, not all scholars agree. Some believe Woodhenge had multiple meanings, part calendar, part ceremonial dance ground, part status flex for the astronomer priests. Others go further off the map, claiming it acted as a kind of sonic amplifier, a prehistoric sound chamber where chanting resonated in weird, echoing ways. There's not much to support that idea, but when you clap your hands here, you do hear something odd in the reverb. Or maybe that's just your sleepy brain playing tricks on you. Let's get quirky for a second. In the 1960s, when archaeologists first rediscovered Woodhenge, they were genuinely confused about what they were looking at. For a while, they thought it might have been a huge corral for animals or a war camp. It wasn't until they began plotting the post patterns and matching them to solstice sunrises that the truth, or at least part of it, began to dawn. Literally, you move slowly from post to post, touching the rough wood, imagining each as it once stood stripped, painted, maybe even carved with glyphs now long vanished. These weren't logs dragged in at random. Each had a role. Each had meaning. The central post? That was likely the sighting pole. People stood behind it, aligning their line of vision with outer posts to mark the changing seasons. It's ancient astronomy without metal tools or written math. Just sky, wood, and memory passed down across generations. You pause again and tilt your head to where the sun would rise on the winter solstice. If you were here 1,000 years ago, you might be wrapped in furs, shivering beside your kin, waiting for that one golden line of sun to split the sky. When it did, the priest-king might raise his arms, chant in a language lost to time, and declare the turning of the season. That's not a metaphor. It's probably how time was literally declared. No clocks, no phones, just a glowing line of light and the thump of a drum. And here comes your eerie, fringe tidbit. A few legends suggest that Cahokian elites believed time itself was a spirit, something alive. Not a concept, but a force. A being you could offend or please, or even harness. In that case, Woodhenge wasn't just a calendar. It was a summoning circle. Time walked through here on schedule. The posts creaked faintly in the wind, though they shouldn't. They're staked too tight for that. But the sound is real, or at least real enough, to make you glance over your shoulder. You imagine one of the priest astronomers standing behind you, shaking his head at how far we've fallen. No reverence. No bone flute ceremonies. Just tourists with sunglasses and water bottles. Historians still debate whether Woodhenge served the whole community or just a religious elite. Was this a public festival ground, or were commoners kept out, left to watch from beyond the mound? The evidence is blurry, like trying to read a sundial at dusk. But one thing's for sure, the alignment was no accident. When the solstice sun hit the central post, something shifted in the air. The city would pause. Offerings might be made. The future, for just a moment, became predictable. As you step outside the timber circle and look back, the geometry still echoes in your mind. Circles within circles. Posts marking cycles you can't quite see anymore. Maybe Cahokia didn't just tell time, it made time. Bent it, measured it, honored it. And somewhere, in the soft wind blowing across the circle, you swear you hear a low rhythmic sound. Not drums, not voices, just something ticking. You turn away from Woodhenge and make your way down a gentle slope toward what looks like a marshy depression in the landscape. It's hard to believe, but this soggy little area overgrown with reeds and croaking frogs used to be part of one of Cahokia's most sophisticated features. Its water management system. It doesn't look impressive at first. There's no stone aqueduct, no grand canal, no clinking fountains. But as you trudge through the soft earth and feel the slight pull of mud underfoot, you start to appreciate what Cahokians managed to do here. They weren't just stacking mounds and watching stars. They were re-engineering the landscape, carving it into something more livable, more sacred, and frankly, more practical. Cahokia was built in a floodplain, a risky move for a civilization, unless you're ready to play the long game with dirt and gravity. The Mississippi River was close enough to bless the city with fertile soil and easy transportation, but also wild enough to swallow it whole every spring if left unchecked. So the Cahokians dug trenches, redirected creeks, and even reshaped entire waterways to accommodate their sprawling city. You're not just walking past a swamp, you're standing in an ancient stormwater design. And it wasn't just for drainage. The ditches doubled as ceremonial features. Some of them framed mounds or defined plazas. Others may have functioned as symbolic borders between sacred and mundane spaces. Water wasn't just a threat, it was also a cleanser, a spiritual boundary, and a source of life. Some scholars even believe Cahokians used water channels for ritual processions, marching barefoot through the muck to purify themselves before major events. Your socks wouldn't survive that, but you might get your soul scrubbed, which seems like a fair trade. You pause near a slightly sunken channel and notice how it curves, not just to follow the land, but to feed into a larger depression that once held a reflective pool. It wasn't natural. Archaeologists have found evidence of clay linings and compacted soil that suggest deliberate shaping. Cahokians may have built artificial lakes to serve as mirrors for celestial events, watching stars and moons ripple across water in ceremonies that blurred heaven and earth. One fringe theory, don't roll your eyes, yet proposes that certain elite dwellings or temples were positioned so the moon's reflection would strike them during specific lunar events. Were these watery portals to the underworld? An attempt to map the heavens onto the ground? Historians still argue whether this was spiritual engineering or just really elegant flood control. Either way, the result was the same. Cahokia harnessed water with a sophistication that belied its lack of metal tools. Speaking of tools, did you know they built these channels with little more than digging sticks? Shoulder blades, woven baskets, and sheer communal willpower? No backhoes, no pumps, just teamwork, sweat, and probably a fair amount of yelling. When a trench needed digging, everyone helped, men, women, even children. It wasn't a chore. It was participation in cosmic order. You tread along one of these ancient ditches and notice something peculiar. The elevation changes are almost imperceptible, but water still knows where to go. That means these builders understood slope gradients to a fine degree without ever formalizing it in writing or math. Just by watching how rain flowed, how ponds swelled, how seasons shifted. If that doesn't qualify as applied science, nothing does. Here's a quirky tidbit. Cahokia's builders created what some now call borrow pits, huge holes, where they dug out dirt to build the mounds. These pits, once emptied, filled with water. Some became fish ponds. Others were possibly breeding grounds for ceremonial turtles or amphibians used in rituals. So next time you complain about potholes, remember they might just be accidental altars to frog gods. As you continue, you spot the faint outline of a causeway, a raised dirt road that once connected key parts of the city across watery lowlands. Elevated paths like this weren't just practical during the rainy season. They also dictated movement. If you walked a causeway, Your route was chosen for you, like rails on a track. And sometimes, being steered in a particular direction meant you were participating in something bigger than yourself. A ceremony, a pilgrimage, a test. But not all water at Cahokia was tame. You reach a spot where archaeological digs revealed sudden breaks in the pattern evidence of flooding that seemed to arrive unexpectedly. Some think an especially wet decade, or perhaps a massive storm, may have damaged parts of the city. Could this have contributed to Cahokia's eventual decline? Historians still debate whether environmental instability played a decisive role, or if it merely revealed deeper fractures already forming in society. You crouch beside a shallow basin, now filled with reeds and dragonflies. You touch the wet ground, and it gives just slightly under your palm. Think of it. This spot might have once reflected the face of a priest in a feathered headdress, peering into the moon's mirror. Or maybe it held the struggling form of a sacrificial offering, slipping beneath the surface while drums pounded from distant mounds. It's sobering. But it's also strange how peaceful the place feels now. There's a harmony to it. Like Cahokia figured out how to coexist with nature rather than dominate it. The water still moves. The frogs still sing, and the channels still guide the rain along. Paths laid down 1,000 years ago. You wipe your hand on your pants, stand up, and look back toward Monk's Mound, its peak just barely visible above the horizon. Even from here, the lines between earth and water, city and swamp, feel deliberate, planned, measured, and somehow alive. Now you follow a worn trail toward a residential area, not one marked by towering mounds or ceremonial plazas, but by the ghosts of post holes and faint outlines in the grass. These were neighborhoods once. People lived here, laughed here, argued over baskets of maize and muddy footprints. You imagine them building fires, tanning hides, whispering stories under that same dim moon hanging overhead right now. It takes a moment to see it, but the layout reveals itself gradually. Rectangular homes, each about 20 by 15 feet, arranged in neat rows or horseshoe shapes. Cahokians weren't tossing their homes around like dice. They were organized, almost uniform. The average house had a wattle and daub frame wooden posts filled in with mud and grasses, and a thatched roof that sloped low to the toe. Ground, cozy, smoky, functional. And these weren't just scattered huts. Entire neighborhoods followed patterns, with shared courtyards and even communal storage buildings. You step lightly around one such imprint, where a longhouse might have stored surplus corn or clay jars of dried squash seeds. Think HOA, but instead of noise complaints, it was probably more like, "Hey, did your child set fire to the granary again?" Still, not everyone lived the same. You follow the path uphill toward a low mound platform and notice the change immediately. The houses up here were larger, spaced farther apart, built on elevated terraces. Welcome to the Cahokian version of gated communities. Elites didn't just live differently, they lived higher, both literally and socially. You peer over the edge of the mound's platform, and it hits you. From here, a leader could survey the common neighborhoods like a god watching ants. Status in Cahokia wasn't just measured by wealth or ancestry, it was encoded into elevation. Historians still argue whether these elites inherited their power or earned it through religious roles. But the consensus is clear. If you were up on a mound, you were somebody. One mainstream historical insight? Evidence suggests that some elite homes had special features: decorated walls, raised hearths, even separate chambers. These weren't temples. These were family residences. And yet, the line between political power and divine favor was razor thin. When your leader claimed to speak to the stars and lived in a house twice the size of yours, you listened. Now for your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once found a house site with a curious pattern of red ochre sprinkled around its edges. Not randomly, intentionally. Was it a protective charm? A ceremonial boundary? Or just an early version of saying, no shoes past this line? No one knows. But clearly, home life and spiritual life weren't separate. The divine seeped into everything, even laundry day. You stroll farther, noticing the fire-cracked rocks clustered where ancient hearths once glowed. These homes had central fire pits, and every evening must have been filled with the scent of roasting maize, stewing squash, or something more pungent if fermented fish was on the menu. You wrinkle your nose at the thought. Cahokians were known to enjoy some powerful smells, but not all homes were so standard. In one excavation, archaeologists uncovered a strange multi-room structure with a higher ratio of exotic goods, mica, copper, marine shells. And bones. Lots of bones. Possibly from feasts. Possibly from rituals. Possibly from something else. Historians still debate whether this was the house of a chief, a shaman, or a community center with serious party energy. You take a seat on a grassy ridge and picture it all coming to life. Children running between homes, their laughter rising into the warm summer air. Mothers weaving mats or tending gardens. Elders huddled in conversation, speaking in tones too low for you to understand. And above them, always, the ever-watchful eyes of the mound dwellers. Here's something subtle but brilliant. Archaeologists have found evidence of fences, wooden palisades, not just around the whole city, but within neighborhoods. Internal fences. Maybe for privacy, maybe for ceremony, maybe for separating the sacred from the everyday. And every fence says something about the culture that builds it. In Cahokia, they didn't fence out nature, they fenced out each other. Just a little. Enough to remind everyone of their place. You run your fingers through the grass and feel a charred lump of earth. Burned daub, maybe from a long-lost home. It's strange how fire leaves behind more than just ash. It creates memory. Archaeologists can tell which homes burned naturally, which were rebuilt, and which might have been torched deliberately, maybe during times of unrest. That's right. Not all Cahokia was peace and maize festivals. There were tensions here. Moments of collapse. Some neighborhoods were abandoned mid-construction. Why? No one agrees. Maybe drought. Maybe political unrest. Maybe the spiritual Wi-Fi just went out. And here comes your eerie whisper. One excavation unearthed a small, circular hut far from the central district, with a single burial inside. No signs of violence. Just a lone figure, buried with a bird skull and a piece of obsidian shaped like a tongue. Was it a healer? A banished prophet? A warning? No one's sure. But the home was isolated. No neighbors. Just the wind and the silence. You glance back one last time as the grass sways gently in the breeze, and it all seems so normal. So human. Homes clustered in lanes. Elites living above. People carving out their space in the world, just like we do. And yet, when the sun hit the rooftops and smoke curled from the hearths, you can bet it all looked like a city that belonged equally to the earth and the stars. You follow a trail now that veers to the edge of the main settlement, where the grass thickens and the land dips toward an odd, curved ridge. At first, it just looks like a dirt embankment. But as you walk along its length, you start to see what it really was. A wall, or more precisely a palisade. A massive one. Imagine hundreds of tall wooden posts, sharpened at the tops, hammered into the earth in a tight, intimidating line. Add guard towers every 70 feet or so. Then imagine being on the outside, looking in. This wasn't just a fence. It was a message. Cahokia's stockade surrounded its central sacred core, stretching nearly 2 miles in a ring around the elite mounds, plazas, and ceremonial structures. The common folk? They lived outside. The inner circle, both literally and socially, was reserved for those at the top. And if you ever doubted whether Cahokia had class divisions, this wall would like to have a word. The wall was rebuilt at least 4 times, and each time it was slightly different. Sometimes thicker, sometimes more elaborate. Historians still argue whether the rebuilds were because of structural decay, symbolic renewal, or evolving threats. But it's clear that the wall mattered deeply. This wasn't some temporary palisade slapped together with leftover branches. This was labor-intensive architecture. Thousands of logs, stripped of bark, sunk into deep trenches, backed by embankments. It screamed permanence and control. Now here's a curious thing. There's very little evidence of large-scale warfare at Cahokia. No fields of battle. No charred enemy camps. So why build a wall that could have starred in a medieval siege movie? Some scholars believe it was less about defense and more about ideology. The wall didn't just keep threats out, it defined who was in. It separated the sacred from the secular, the chosen from the rest. A psychological divide as much as a physical one. But let's not get too comfortable. There were dangers. You pass one of the excavated bastions, those stubby little towers placed along the wall at intervals. From here, Cahokian sentinels could have watched for smoke, strangers, or suspicious movement among their own people. Surveillance didn't begin with CCTV. It began with high ground and good ears. Here's your mainstream fact of the night. The stockade appears to have had controlled entry points gates that narrowed foot traffic and forced people to pass through in single file, like spiritual customs checkpoints. If you wanted into the central plaza, you had to be seen, known, maybe even purified. And speaking of purification, let's talk scapegoats. Cahokia wasn't above the occasional ceremonial sacrifice, and some archaeologists think these walls may have framed those moments. A tightly controlled space, a central altar, a gathering of onlookers just outside the fence. It's possible that ritual killings were carried out as theater part spiritual protection, part political deterrent. Fringe? Yes, but some burials support the idea, with evidence of bound limbs, decapitations, and careful placement of bodies in ways that suggest something more than simple burial rites. Of course, historians still debate whether these deaths were punishment, sacrifice, or honor. Were these victims, volunteers, or honored guests on a one-way trip to the afterlife? Depends on who you ask and what spirits you believe still linger near. These old fence lines. You walk now between where 2 ancient gates once stood. The earth rises just slightly beneath your feet, almost imperceptible, like a phantom threshold. Did Cahokians pause here before entering? Were there guards? Priests with feathered cloaks and eyes painted black? Maybe even offerings left at the gate's beads, feathers, smudged clay idols? Here's your quirky detail. One excavation near the wall revealed a curious item, an effigy pipe shaped like a weeping man with bulging eyes. It was buried alone, near a broken post hole, as if someone had tossed it away in haste. Some speculate it was a ritual object tied to mourning or confession. Others joke it was just the prehistoric version of "I made a mistake" vibes, but it speaks to something deeper. This wall didn't just mark a city border, it staged emotions. Grief, fear, worship, exclusion. It created a space where power played out in dirt and wood. And like all good boundaries, it kept out what the people feared and kept in what they revered. From the inside, the wall offered order. From the outside, maybe dread. You imagine a pilgrim arriving after a long journey, seeing the spikes, the towers, the silhouettes of guards pacing under a blood-orange sky. Would you feel awe or unease? Probably both. And while we're getting spooky, there are oral traditions passed down by descendant. Tribes that speak of places where the earth was, guarded by dead trees with sharp mouths. Whether that was Cahokia or another mound site, it certainly fits. The wall, in some versions, had spirit guardians. Not just guards with spears, but watchers you couldn't see. Shadows that followed intruders even after they left. Sleep tight. You walk the last stretch of the stockade's path and feel a strange calm settle in. The wall is gone now, of course just lines of soil stains and gentle mounds where posts once stood. But its shape remains. Its purpose lingers. Even when it was dismantled or perhaps ceremonially burned, the idea of it stayed, etched into the city's memory. Because Cahokia didn't just build cities. It built meaning. In its walls, in its mounds, and in the invisible lines that still linger in the soil, long after the last guard put down his torch. You step off the path now and approach a rise just to the west of Monk's Mound. The slope is smaller, gentler, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But beneath your feet lies one of Cahokia's most breathtaking and disturbing discoveries. Mound 72. It looks like a modest hill, but its story is anything but small. As you climb the grassy incline and feel the hush deepen around you, you're walking over a burial site, one that holds secrets about power, identity, and just how far ancient people might go to keep the cosmic balance intact. Let's start with the headline. Beneath Mound 72, archaeologists uncovered the remains of nearly 300 individuals, layered in multiple stages. But it's the centerpiece that turns heads, the body of a man, laid on a platform of shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon. Wings outstretched, beak, tail, everything. This wasn't just burial, it was iconography, theater, propaganda. Who was he? A high priest? A ruler? A divine being in human skin? Historians still argue whether this Birdman was a single extraordinary figure or a symbolic stand-in for a lineage of sacred leaders. What's clear is that whoever he was, Cahokia went to great lengths to give him the kind of funeral Beyoncé could only dream of. The falcon itself matters. In Mississippian belief systems, birds of prey, hawks, falcons, thunderbirds were symbols of the upper world, a realm of power, vision, and divine authority. By laying this man in a falcon shape, the message was loud and clear. This guy wasn't just going up to the sky. He was the sky. But let's not forget the others. Around this central figure were clustered dozens, yes, dozens of other individuals, many of whom show signs of ritual sacrifice. Young women laid out in rows. Some were buried alive. Others seemed to have had their necks broken or their chests crushed. It's unsettling, no way around it. The people of Cahokia believed in order. But sometimes order came at a cost, and here's your quirky, almost unbelievable detail. One burial pit nearby held 4 headless men, their hands also missing. Just let that image simmer. Who were they? Criminals? Sacrifices? Ritual decoys? Theories abound. Some even suggest these were neutralizers, people intentionally dismembered to strip them of identity, rendering them spiritually inert. It's dark stuff. But again, it's real. You crouch by a sign marker, brushing your fingers across the grass. Somewhere beneath lies the shell of someone who once lived, worshipped, and died in the shadow of a giant mound. It's not just a burial site. It's a storybook, a layered novel of power and mystery, written in bones. Archaeologists found other peculiar items buried with the Birdman. Copper-covered rods, chunky stone discs, finely worked projectile points made of imported shirt. These weren't grave goods. They were statements. Each item whispered something about trade networks, social clout, and connections that reached far beyond Cahokia's walls. Mainstream fact. Many of these artifacts came from as far away as the Ozarks, the Great Lakes, and the Gulf Coast. That's right, Cahokia's influence wasn't regional. It was continental. Items were traded, gifted, or conquered into its orbit, then laid down in the dirt as proof of dominion. And here's the most haunting debate. Was Mound 72 built all at once for a single extraordinary death ritual? Or was it layered over time, evolving with each new burial? The stratigraphy layers of soil and human remains is complex. Some archaeologists believe the mound grew organically over decades, each layer marking a major event. Others argue for a planned, almost choreographed sequence. Still others whisper the idea that some of the buried weren't locals at all, but captives brought from distant lands. As you stand atop the mound, the air feels heavier somehow. Not ominous, just full, saturated, like something's still happening here. Even if you can't quite see it, there's one last eerie fringe theory. And it's a doozy. Some suggest that Mound 72 is not just a tomb but an astronomical marker. Its position slightly askew from the city's main grid may align with the winter solstice sunset. In other words, the Birdman may have been buried at the moment the sun died, in a mound shaped like a winged being, so he could carry the dying light into the underworld and bring it back. That's not just myth. That's drama with architectural precision. And there's something else. A whisper of guilt, maybe? Cahokia's grandeur came at a cost, and this mound is where that cost is most painfully obvious. For all their innovation and cosmic order, the people of this city also lived under enormous spiritual pressure. To feed the stars, you might have to feed the earth. And sometimes that meant blood. You turn away slowly, trying not to imagine the sounds that once filled this place. The sobbing, the chanting, the scrape of digging tools at dusk. The ground here has been quiet for centuries, but the stories haven't stopped echoing. Mound 72 isn't just a burial site. It's Cahokia's confession, and you've just read it with your feet. You wander away from the mounds now, stepping into a wide, flat patch of earth that at first looks ordinary. No towering platform, no ceremonial plaza, just an open area of grass and scattered stones. But you're standing on a ghost road trade route worn so smooth by centuries of feet, hooves, and carts. Yes, even without wheels, things were dragged, that it still hums with a kind of residual motion. You'd never guess it, but this was once the lifeblood of Cahokia. The people here didn't just build a city, they wired themselves into an entire continent. At its peak, Cahokia was the beating heart of a massive trade network that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic. You wouldn't know it from the quiet trees around you. But right here, people once exchanged obsidian, copper, salt, mica, marine shells, bare teeth. And stories in dozens of languages. Mainstream historians agree on this much. Cahokia was a nexus, a gathering place, a distribution center where goods and maybe even ideas passed from one world to another. You imagine merchants arriving with woven satchels and carved sticks hung with polished stones, teenagers eyeing fancy shell necklaces, elders bartering over salt bricks like they were gold. This wasn't just trade, it was culture transfer. What's strange is that Cahokia left almost no roads in the way we define them. No paved streets, no carved highways. But dig beneath the surface, and you find packed earth pathways, repetitive use-wear lines, and subtle markers, posts, mounds, even trees that point the way across vast regions. The roads weren't laid out for wagons. They were laid out for people. You walk a little farther and kick something half buried in the dirt. It's a piece of chert not from around here. Maybe a broken tool. Maybe the last trace of a trade deal gone right or wrong. It might have come from Illinois or Idaho. Historians still argue whether Cahokia sent traders out or simply attracted others in. Was it an exporter or a gravitational pull? And then there's your fringe theory. Some believe Cahokia wasn't just connected by trade, but by pilgrimage. That people didn't just come for shells and copper, but to touch the earth of the mounds themselves. To walk the access roads, chant at Woodhenge, bathe in ritual ponds. That it was the ancient version of Mecca or Jerusalem, a spiritual marketplace as much as an economic one. Now imagine this. You're a traveler from a village hundreds of miles away. You've heard whispers of Cahokia, its lights, its priests, its mounds that scrape the clouds. You walk for weeks, following guideposts carved into trees or stories told around fires. Then one day, the landscape changes. The soil feels different underfoot. The horizon sprouts with mounds, and the wind smells like distant fires and wet earth. You've arrived. One archaeological curiosity helps bring this image to life. Some of the exotic goods found in Cahokia weren't just stored, they were buried. Not in graves, but in pits. Carefully arranged caches of copper axes, shell beads, or mica flakes. Were these offerings? Dowries? Political gestures? Some even suggest they were closing ceremonies for trade relationships. When the bond was strong, you sealed it with earth dot, and then there are the plaza markers, simple but genius. Some open plazas were framed by poles that likely acted as directional signs. Walk past 4 cedar posts, turn left at the mound with red clay, and follow the ridge. Cahokia may have mapped its trade routes into the bones of the city itself. No street signs needed. Just memory, rhythm, and repetition. Now here's a fun fringe detail. One researcher proposed that Cahokians used music to navigate. That certain chants or rhythms were only sung along particular paths, creating a kind of sonic GPS. Walk this road, sing this melody. That way you didn't just find your way. You felt it. It's a lovely idea. No proof. But when the wind picks up and rustles the grass in patterns, you kind of believe it. You sit for a moment on a sun-warmed patch of earth and close your eyes. You hear it now, not voices exactly, but a kind of low, moving rhythm. Not drums, not speech. Just the imagined thump of thousands of footsteps from 1,000 years ago, carrying goods and gossip, prayers and plagues, all toward this impossible city in the dirt dot. And just when you think the story's too neat, too polished, here comes the scholarly mess. Some researchers believe that Cahokia's trade routes may have included slavery. There's evident skull trauma, grave patterns, broken shackles, that some of those who arrived here didn't come willingly. It's not a comfortable thought, but it's part of the truth. Cahokia wasn't a utopia. It was human. And humans carry both gift and greed wherever they go. You rise slowly and walk the ancient route back toward the center. And even though the trees are still and the birds are quiet, the path feels busy somehow. Like it's never truly empty. Like someone just passed by feet, barely brushing the dirt, eyes on the horizon, satchel full of something precious. They won't look back. They never do. You return now to the Grand Plaza of the vast, grassy heart of Cahokia. In the moonlight, it looks empty, almost tranquil. But don't let that fool you. Once, this space throbbed with energy. You're standing where tens of thousands of people might have gathered, shoulder to shoulder, their chants and drumbeats vibrating the very air dot. This was where the city breathed. The Grand Plaza wasn't just a park or a marketplace. It was the central stage for Cahokia's greatest performances. Ceremonies, games, festivals, political declarations, and maybe even public punishments all played out here. Imagine the plaza filled to the edges, families sitting on reed mats, faces painted, the scent of roasted maize and river fish wafting through the air. A priest-king in feathered robes might have stood atop Monk's Mound, his voice carrying across the city as runners relayed messages from the edges of the crowd dot. And then one day, it stopped. The silence of the Grand Plaza today feels too complete. No voices, no footprints, No incense or echoes. Historians still argue whether Cahokia declined gradually or collapsed in a swift, catastrophic sweep. But this much is agreed upon. The plazas emptied before the mounds crumbled. The center went still while the city still technically stood. One mainstream theory blames climate. Around the 1200s, a severe drought may have struck the region, disrupting crops and throwing an agriculture-dependent society into panic. Without food, ceremonies lose their luster. Faith wavers. People scatter. The plazas go quiet. But another theory haunts the edges of that explanation. Some scholars believe Cahokia's leadership fractured from within, that religious divisions or power struggles tore the city apart. The rituals that once united everyone, maybe they stopped working. Maybe the people stopped believing. Or worse, maybe they blamed the priests. You can't help but imagine the last few ceremonies in the plaza. A smaller crowd, weaker drums, fewer offerings, a hesitation in the chants. The last time the sun rose on a solstice, and no one showed up to watch. And then there's the strangest part. Unlike cities that fade from war or fire, Cahokia left behind little sign of violence. No scorched buildings, no battlefields, just abandonment. The plazas were left to the weeds, the mounds to the wind. The shell beads cracked under the sun. The silence stretched longer and longer. One curious fact: archaeologists found child burials in what should have been an elite zone of the plaza. That's not normal. Children weren't usually buried there. Were these sacrifices during a crisis? Desperate offerings to restore a broken balance? Or were they victims of illness, buried hastily near the city's spiritual center because there was nowhere else left to go? You walk the perimeter slowly, letting your steps map the invisible boundaries. From here, you can see the skeletal shape of where Woodhenge once stood, and the shadowy rise of Monk's Mound looming to the east. They form a triangle with this plaza at the base, as if the entire city was once designed to funnel energy into this central spot. But without people, that geometry collapses. Without belief, it's just grass and dirt dot. Now here's your fringe fragment. A few researchers have proposed that Cahokia didn't collapse in a vacuum, but was intentionally shut down. That the priest kings, sensing loss of order, closed the ceremonial core themselves, buried sacred items, burned select structures, disbanded rituals to prevent their misuse, like pulling the plug on a spiritual machine. There's no proof, only patterns, charred remnants, and eerie silences where noise should be. You pause at the exact center of the plaza, once marked by a great post and axis mundi, the world tree, the pole around which the universe turned. No sign of it now, but its imprint remains in the soil. And some visitors say they feel it. A sensation of spinning, of weightlessness. As if the world really did pivot from this one forgotten point. You sit cross-legged in the grass. For a moment, you try to hear the city again. The sandals scraping earth. The chanted names of the dead. The thrum of drums echoing against clay walls. But it's gone, like a spell broken, and still, the plaza doesn't feel dead. It feels asleep, dormant, like it's waiting for someone to stand in the center again and sing the right song, say the right words, realign the stars. A final whisper from the archaeologists. Even after Cahokia was abandoned, later indigenous peoples avoided the mounds, called the site sacred, dangerous, alive. They didn't settle here. They walked wide around it. Whatever was built here hadn't been forgotten. It had been sealed. You stand slowly, brushing grass from your hands. The wind moves across the plaza like a tide. And though it's quiet, you feel the shape of something still coiled in the dirt like breath held just beneath the surface. Maybe Cahokia didn't vanish. Maybe it's just waiting for its next sunrise. The final stretch of your journey, takes you along a path few notice, curving away from the main mound clusters and toward a less celebrated corner of the site. At first glance, it's just a patchwork of uneven earth, stray post holes, and grassy bumps. But if you look closely, if you squint into the texture of the land, you start to see the outlines of something that never quite made it. Half-built mounds, unfinished platforms, post holes that begin and just stop. Welcome to Cahokia's breath, held mid-sentence. There's a kind of melancholy here. Not tragedy, something quieter. Like ambition interrupted. These mounds were planned. The spacing, the orientation, even the foundations were laid with the same precision seen throughout the city. But the final layers were never added. The ramps end abruptly. Some terraces were never packed down. You're not walking among ruins. You're walking through a construction site abandoned in place. Mainstream. Historians agree. Something changed before these final projects could be completed. Whether the city was crumbling from the top down or fading from the edges inward, by the time work stopped here, the momentum had been lost. No more baskets of dirt. No more chanting work crews. Just silence. And then there's a kind of poetic dialquaint, if it weren't so eerie. Archaeologists have found empty post holes where a structure was clearly intended, but never built. As if someone said, "Here will stand a temple," and then simply walked away. Maybe the labor force vanished. Maybe the leaders did. Or maybe belief itself started unraveling. One quirky tidbit found near one of these incomplete mounds. A child's toy miniature clay figurine shaped like a deer. It was just lying in the dirt near a half-dug trench, as if dropped by a worker's child or placed there deliberately. Was it a charm? A farewell? A silent protest? No one knows. But something about it, the innocence, the loneliness sticks with you. You press your foot into a sunken trench, now filled with moss and thistle, and imagine the last workers who stood here. Did they know it was the end? Were they told to go home one day and never summoned again? Or did they simply stop showing up one by one as hope thinned and resources drained? Historians still debate whether Cahokia ended in a moment of collapse or a slow forgetting. There's no one grand answer. Just scattered clues, like half-finished sentences trailing into ellipses. A buried staircase that leads nowhere. A post hole too wide, like the builders miscalculated or changed their minds halfway through. But it's not just the absence of structures. It's what was left behind. You pass a pit full of debris, shards of pottery, chunks of daub, a cracked figurine. It looks like garbage, but it might have been intentional. Some believe these were part of ritual closures, offerings made before a project was canceled. Even in endings, there was ceremony. Now comes the fringe theory that clings like fog to this part of the site. Some say the unfinished mounds were never meant to be finished, that they were symbolic. That by leaving structures incomplete, Cahokians were honoring the idea that nothing on earth should be perfect, that only the spirits could complete the work. It's a compelling thought. Not provable, of course, but when you see those half-formed slopes, it makes a weird kind of sense. You crouch by one particularly low mound, barely a foot high, and let your hand rest on its curve. It feels like an inhale that never turned into speech, like a song left unplayed. This city so vast, so exacting, still had mysteries it never got around to explaining. And even the descendants of Cahokia's builders, the indigenous nations of the Mississippi Valley, have kept their distance from these bones of earth, not out of fear necessarily, but out of reverence. You'll hear this from their oral traditions. The mounds are sleeping. Don't wake them unless you're ready to finish what they started. The last thing you notice before you turn to leave is a line of tiny holes, evenly spaced, almost lost in the grass. They trail off toward the trees, marking the beginning of something long forgotten. A building? A fence? A dream? It doesn't matter now. Cahokia didn't burn. It didn't crumble into ash. It simply exhaled. And then stopped. As you walk away, the mounds behind you fade into shadow. The wind is soft, the ground still. The stars overhead are the same ones they used to align their mounds, their plazas, their prayers. And though the people are gone, the blueprint lingers traced in clay, carved into memory, buried under roots. The city was never erased. Just paused, waiting. Got wind dash down, 300 words. And now, as you breathe in the hush of this quiet earth, let the rhythm of Cahokia settle into your bones. The mounds rise behind you like giant sleeping shoulders beneath a blanket of grass, their purpose softened by time, but not erased. You've walked their sacred grid lines, traced the curves of abandoned dreams, and heard the echoes of a people who once aligned cities with stars. Notice how your thoughts begin to slow. The wind has calmed. Even the crickets seem to whisper now. The people of Cahokia lived by cycles, by solstices, seasons, sunrises and sunsets, and maybe you can feel some of that rhythm humming faintly inside you now. The beat of footsteps over ancient trade routes, the pull of water flowing through hand-dug canals, the rise and fall of voices in forgotten chants. Let your breath come easy, in and out, like the tides of their river, like the pulse of this silent place. You don't have to solve the mystery tonight. You don't have to decide whether Cahokia fell or simply faded. You just have to lie here now, wrapped in the wonder of it all. The beauty of a city built from dirt and stars. A plan sketched on the skin of the earth, and still visible if you tilt your head just right. So close your eyes. Let the grass grow high around your thoughts. Let the mounds watch over you a little longer. The past is quiet now, and so are you.